So the next type of loop we'd like to take a look at is called the for loop. The for loop is a loop that really is controlled by a counting variable. We're going to call it the loop control variable. This one variable will determine how many times the loop will execute, when the loop will end, etc. So here's the general syntax of what the loop looks like, and we'll show you some examples here in a moment. So the name of the loop is for, and now there are like three parts to this loop body here, or the loop header. First, the first thing we're going to do here is going to initialize and declare and initialize, or just initialize the loop control variable. Here's what we'll establish what variable will control the loop and what its initial value is. Next, these are separated by semicolons, by the way. Next, the middle section here is the test. Much like the while loop, there has to be a logical test here in the middle of the for loop to determine should the loop stop. We'll see that in a second. And then the third part of this is to actually update the loop control variable. After the body of the loop has run, we will make a change to the loop control variable. All right, and this will be the statement that will determine how the loop control variable is updated. And then inside the loop are really just the statements of the loop body, and these will be the programming statements that will be repeated over and over as the loop runs. Okay, so let's take a look at one and just maybe point out these parts of the for loop in a real example. Okay, so we have our loop control variable here is going to be this variable countdown. Great, and here is where we will initialize it. So here we will assign the value to 3 in countdown, and that's where the loop will start. All right, so countdown begins with an initial value of 3. Then we have the Boolean test. Here is where we're going to check each time the loop runs. We will check, is this statement still true? Okay, is countdown greater than 0? The minute that this statement is no longer true, the loop will end. Okay, and then third, let's update the loop control variable. So each iteration of the loop, we will then do whatever it says here to update the loop control variable. It can be a lot of things. We can add to the loop control variable. In this case, we are decrementing, so we're going to want to counting down. But it could be anything. As long, honestly, as it evaluates to a number, we can make almost anything show up there. We'll start simple right now. All right, and then inside the loop of the body of the loop here, this is what we want to have repeated. So I like to print out the value of countdown and then say end counting. So we will continue to print these two statements as long as this is true. And then finally, when it's done, we will exit the for loop and then go to the next line. Okay, so let's take a look at what that will actually look like. So the for loop starts at 3. Cool. Is 3 greater than 0? Yes, it is. Go ahead and do the loop. Print out countdown, 3, and counting. Now that we've reached the end of the for loop, go back up to the top and update the loop control variable. So this now decrements. So the countdown is now equal to 2. Is 2 greater than 0? Yes, it is. Print out 2 and counting. Go back to the top. Decrement the loop control variable. Now we're at 1. Is 1 greater than 0? Yes, it is. Print out the 1 and counting. Come back to the top. Decrement countdown to 0. Is 0 greater than 0? No, it's not. So we stop the loop, skip past the end of it, and then print out blast off. And behind my face here, you'll see the output 3 and counting, 2 and counting, 1 and counting, blast off. Okay. So the general flow of a for loop. All right. So as the loop starts, we will initialize the loop control variable and check it. Is the loop control variable less than the condition that's stated? If it's true, do whatever it says in the loop body. Then update the loop control variable and check again. Is the new loop control variable Does it meet this criteria? Is this now a true statement? If it is, do the statements here, update the loop control variable, check again. If this becomes a false statement, end the loop. Okay. So initialize, test, update. Initialize, test, update. That's the pattern in the loop. So we'll take the similar example that we had before. I've modified it now to include a for loop. So here's our for loop. I've declared this loop control counter here called count, and we will initialize it to 1. This loop will keep running as long as count is less than or equal to 6. And every time the loop iterates, we will add 1 to count. Okay, so to start, the value of count is 1. Cool. Is 1 less than 6, less than or equal to 6? Yes, it is. Please print 1 on the screen. Then go back to the top and increment. Now the value of count is 2. Test again. Is 2 less than equal to 6? Yes, it is. Please print it on the screen. Go back up to the top and increment the loop control variable to 3. Is 3 less than 6? Yes, it is. Print it on the screen. Update count. Count's now at 4. Is 4 less than 6? Yes, it is. Print that 4. Increment count to 5. Is 5 less than 6? Yes, it is. Please print count. Increment count. Count is now 6. Cool. Is 6 less than or equal to 6? Yes, it is. Please print it. Go back to the top. Increment count. Count is now equal to 7. Is 7 less than or equal to 6? No, it's not. The loop ends. Sorry. That's where the loop ends. And there's your output 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So initialize the loop control variable. What is the test to determine if the loop will continue to run? And how do we update the loop control variable? Let's take a quick moment to just take a look at the different options you have here for declaring the loop control variable. Right. First, in the examples above, we have talked about just declare the variable outside of the for loop up here, and then you can use countdown inside the for loop here. We'll initialize it with 3 and go about our day. The other option you have is actually to declare countdown right here inside the for loop. Both of these options will work. Both this and this will work. Okay, but here's the thing you need to keep in mind. And this is a concept we will come back to later in the course. We're going to see this a lot, and we do care about this a lot. It's something called a concept called variable scope. Variable scope basically asks, where in the program do you actually have access to this variable? If countdown is declared inside the for loop, like it is here, countdown then is only available to the for loop. In reality, countdown only exists in memory as long as the for loop is running. So in this case, this is all right because we're not using countdown anywhere else in the program for now. So it would be okay that countdown only exists inside of the for loop. If you want to use that variable somewhere else in the program, you are going to have to declare it like we did here. Because countdown is declared outside the for loop, it's now available before the for loop, to the for loop, and after the for loop. It's available in the entire program. Okay. If you declare it inside the for loop, it's only available while the for loop runs. If you were to have declared a variable, let's say in between these two print line statements, it would only exist as long as the for loop is running. The minute the for loop stops, that variable is no longer accessible to the rest of the program. In reality, it doesn't exist in memory anymore. Okay, so this is a concept called variable scope. Just be careful. If you ever want to use countdown outside of the loop, you have to make sure you declare it outside the loop. So finally, so how do you decide what loop you should use? Okay. We haven't talked about the do while loop because it's not part of the AP subset, so I'm going to kind of just skip past this one. A while loop is great if you have a loop that requires the possibility of iterating 0 times. It's very possible that the condition you put on the while loop could never come true. And then at that point, the while loop is just skipped right past. So if you have something in your program where you want this chance for the loop to never run, a while loop might be the way to go. If you know how many times the loops should run, or you have some sort of a computation that should change the loop control variable at an equal increment in each iteration, maybe a for loop is the way to go. We know ahead of time how many times the for loop has to run, or if you want to, we want to take the loop control variable and always add 2 to it. Add 2, add 2, add 2. That probably sounds like a for loop. Right, so those are the kind of ways there. For those who remember the do while loop, you'll remember that the while loop and the do while loop are almost the same, except that in a do while loop, the body of the loop iterates always at least one time, and the test happens at the end. The AP does not really care, or they don't cover do while loop, so I'm going to skip past that right now for the moment. Final thought here, how do we control the number of iterations that the loop will take? If you have a counting variable, the loop control variable, that is, chances are that's a for loop. There's some value that keeps getting incremented, and that will stop the loop when you want it to happen. If you want to do something like ask the user if they'd like to continue type of a deal, this sounds more like a while loop. Right? And maybe the condition in the while loop, while response equals yes, something like that. You could just let them keep, would you like to continue? Yes, great. Execute the loop again. Would you like to continue? Right? So you can kind of do it this way. So you maybe would ask before the loop iterates. That's probably a while loop. And then finally, we've seen some examples of using what we call a sentinel value. A sentinel value is typically another value that would be entered by the user that would indicate to the loop stop. We've seen some examples of this already where it's like you're entering a list of numbers and then enter a negative value if you're done. The negative value is what we call the sentinel. That's what would cause the loop to stop. So maybe your while loop looks like while x is while x is greater than 0. All right. So these are kind of the ways you would control a number of loop iterations. The loop control variable in the for loop. Do you want to ask the user to enter a yes, no? Do you want to have them enter a negative value? Or do you want it to be somehow calculated? Those all sound like while loops to me. And finally, the last thing we need to pay attention to is something you will learn very quickly. It's something called an infinite loop. This is an error. This is a problem. This is an example where a loop never ends. It just continues to be repeated over and over and over. And here's why. So here's an example. We start num at 0. And here is the while loop. While num is less than 10. Okay. Num equals num minus 1. So now the value of num is -1. Print out the -1 and go back to the top. Is -1 less than 10? Yes, it is. Subtract 1 from num. Now we're at -2. Print out the number. If you see here, this num will never reach 10. There is no way that the value of num is ever going to be greater than 10. So this loop will never end. This is called an infinite loop. Two things are going to happen. Either the compiler is going to find your infinite loop and it will stop you with an error, or literally the loop is going to keep running until your computer runs out of memory. Okay? This is not a good idea. this will definitely be a problem. So you want to test your loops to make sure that the controlling statement or the controlling variable can actually reach the condition that would cause it to stop. Right? Otherwise, you find yourself stuck in an infinite loop, and you will find that pretty quickly when you try to run your program, and it never wants to end. Okay, so that's a little bit about loops, both the for loop and the while loop.